Good afternoon. We are Group 5, and our members are Wesley Kim, Katherine Pineda, me, Nicolette Bond, and Haotian Zhang. Our group chose to do our research on the British literary author George Orwell. In order to fully understand George Orwell as a British literary author, we need to look at him through different critical lenses. Wesley will be using literary history and cultural criticisms to explain the social, political, and literary context in which the author was influenced. Then Catherine will do a biological study of Orwell's life to highlight key moments that affected him and his achievements. I, Nicolette, will then utilize psychological strategies to dive deep into the author's beliefs that are translated into themes and motivations in his writing. Lastly, Haushin will combine multiple critical lenses to analyze the plot, symbolism, and characters of Orwell's Animal Farm.
Europe's history has been riddled with centuries of blood, conflict, and chaos. It was during one of these moments in Europe's history that George Orwell lived in. Orwell's life is full of political lessons and experiences that can be seen in his works such as Animal Farm and 1984. In 1922, George Orwell followed the family tradition and became part of the Indian Imperial Police as an assistant superintendent in Burma during the British occupation. During the British occupation, many locals did not accept the rule and rebelled. The British Army stationed at Burma acted as judge, jury, and executioners, both rebels and those who aided the rebels. British troops were known to have committed mass executions. In May of 1937, Orwell actually had an encounter with fascism. And by encounter, I mean having to fight them off in order to survive. The Spanish Civil War was in effect, fought by the Republican government of Spain against the nationalists. Oh, and the nationalists happened to be supported by Italy and Nazi Germany. By 1943, to say that Europe was going through a rough patch wouldn't be incorrect. It would also be the understatement of the millennium. The Second World War was in its third year, and England and Russia had found themselves as allies against the Axis powers. The current Russian leader was Joseph Stalin, someone for whom Orwell harbored no love. For some background on things that Stalin did, he ruled the Soviet Union through fear and the elimination of anyone who would oppose his rule. He has killed millions through the use of a secret police, encouraging his citizens to spy on their own neighbors, and finally through the use of sending people to gulags, labor camps. However, even with all these actions that Stalin took, Orwell would have been in the minority, as England held Stalin in high regard. It was during this climate that Orwell wrote Animal Farm. Animal Farm was published on August 17, 1945, less than a month before the end of the Second World War. Orwell wrote the novel using the Russian Revolution of 1917, the very event that gave birth to what would become communism in the first place, as an allegorical base. The Russian Revolution happened due to a long period of the Russian people being dirt poor and the country being underdeveloped. Russia had also entered World War I in August of 1914, and during that time, Russia was not doing so hot against the industrialized military of Germany. You can imagine how blooded that left the Russian people. Eventually, the Russian people just got sick of the Tsar and his hapless decisions, and the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, led a surprisingly bloodless coup d'etat. That was when communism was first formed, essentially. By June 8, 1949, the Second World War had been over for less than 4 years. Europe was still trying its best to recover from a war that left the continent and its residing countries exhausted, bloodied, traumatized, and poor. And George Orwell publishes 1984. 1984 was written as a warning against Nazism and Stalinism, in which a dystopian future is shown where the ruling government controls the populace through fear, manipulation, surveillance, and the eradication of free thought. 1984 is where much of Orwell's political views, fears, and warnings are at their most prominent. The dystopian society displayed in 1984 helped to coin the term Orwellian when describing a government that utilizes authoritarian or totalitarian practices. Governments, such as the Chinese government, have been described as Orwellian on steroids due to their intense use of surveillance and media manipulation. There is even a discussion about how modern tech companies such as Facebook, yes, I am very old, using algorithms to cater to their users is encroaching upon their privacy and is an Orwellian issue, though the use of Orwellian is somewhat loose in this case. By Orwell's own words, his writing style was influenced by W. Somerset Maugham. Another writer Orwell was fond of was Jack London, with London's The People of the Abyss helping to influence Orwell's The Road to Wigan Pier. Orwell also praised Charles Dickens and Herman Melville in his literary essays.
Now that we know more about the context in which Orwell lived, we can look at his life.
George Orwell was born under the name Eric Arthur Blair on June 25, 1903, in Motihari, Bengal, India. He was born to father Richard Blair and mother Ida Mabel Blair. His father worked for the Indian Civil Service, which was the arm of the British government that ran the colony there, and was in charge of overseeing the export of opium to Asia. His mother was the daughter of a tea merchant and is the one who primarily raised Orwell alongside his sister Marjorie. At around the age of 1, Orwell was sent back to England and was raised in the Thames Valley locale in Oxfordshire in a childhood he would later describe as being part of the lower upper middle classes. This childhood home would later serve as a setting for his novel Coming Up for Air, which was published in 1939. Orwell was a very studious child in his early years and attended a few different schools throughout his school years. He first attended a small Anglican parish school in Henley at the age of 5, where he apparently impressed a few of his teachers. From this, he got a recommendation to attend the prestigious school for boys, St. Cyprian's Preparatory School in Eastbourne, Sussex. This school also notably educated a few other bright minds, such as Sir Cecil Beaton, a British fashion portrait and war photographer, Cyril Connolly, an English literary critic and writer famous for his autobiography titled Enemies of Promise, and Gavin Maxwell, a British naturalist and author best known for his nonfiction writings such as Ring of Bright Water, about how he brought back an otter from Iraq and raised it in Scotland, just to name a few. Although his parents did not have the funds to pay the tuition for such an education, Orwell was able to get in on a scholarship, which allowed his parents to pay only half of the usual fees for the school. Orwell, however, did not look back on his time at St. Cyprian's with much enthusiasm and went on to write the essay titled Such Were the Joys, recounting his time at the school with a tone that has been described as, quote, biting resentment. This essay was not published until later in 1932 for fear of action against him due to defamation. Despite this, Orwell managed to receive scholarships to both Wellington and Eton College. After a semester at Wellington, he began school at Eton in May of 1917. Here, he was a King's Scholar from 1917 to 1921, later writing that he had been relatively happy at Eton, but that he stopped working seriously in his education here. Accounts of his time here vary, with many claiming he was a poor student and many denying this. He was, however, disliked by a lot of his teachers here due to a perceived disrespect for their authority. He ended up leaving the school in December of 1921. Later, in June of 1922, Orwell passed the entrance examination for the Indian Imperial Police, the British colonial force that maintained order in the South Asian colonies, and was accepted into its Burma division. He went on to spend the next 5 years in Burma, a colony of the British Empire now known as Myanmar and bordering India, Bangladesh, China, Laos, and Thailand. Very little is known of his time stationed there. By some accounts, this period of Orwell's life is seen as a mournful one due to a parentally ordained exile. However, both sides of his family were professionally involved with the Eastern Empire, and he has stated that his reasoning for going to Burma is due to the fact that he had family there. Despite little information being available here, we do know that it was this period of his life that inspired two of his best-known essays, A Hanging and Shooting an Elephant. The first essay, A Hanging, first published in 1931, describes the hanging of a Hindu man in Burma as being hurried but routine. Shooting an Elephant was first published in 1936 and narrates the actions and mistreatments that officers succumb to in the Burma police, while also making a point about the imperialistic nature to harm both sides. This time also became the basis for his first novel, titled Burmese Days, published in 1934. This book explores his experiences during his time in the Imperial Police and is described as exposing the dark side of British colonialism. Orwell left Burma in June of 1927 on a medical certificate after contracting dengue fever. Once back home, he made a decision to resign from the Imperial Police, having grown to hate imperialism. His time back home was a very tumultuous period for Orwell. After having left Burma, he led a vagrant life for 5 years, spending some time at his parents' house in Suffolk and others at his sister's home. During this time, he took on many jobs in order to make ends meet. He taught in private schools for some time and spent other times living in Paris and masquerading as a tramp or a beggar. He is said to be masquerading due to the fact that he was never a full-time vagrant and would often leave his family's homes to, quote, explore the depths of poverty. He would take up random jobs, including for a time working as a dishwasher in Paris, and go off as a vagrant, which later became the basis for his book Down and Out in Paris and London, published in 1933. In this book, he recounts his experiences living as part of the lowest class and writes that the Paris slums are a gathering place for eccentric people who have fallen into solitary, half-mad grooves of life and giving up trying to be normal or decent. Poverty frees them from ordinary standards of behavior, just as money frees people from work. This book is also the first time he took up the pseudonym George Orwell, George being the name of the reigning monarch at the time, and Orwell the name of a river near his childhood home, at which he spent a lot of time during this era of his life. It is believed that he adopted this pseudonym to avoid bringing shame to his family by using his real name, as well as because he was never fond of the name Eric. His teaching career was brought to an end shortly after due to a bout of pneumonia towards the end of 1934, when he used a long stay in Southwold to heal and complete a second novel titled A Clergyman's Daughter in 1935. This began a very productive time in Orwell's writing career. He later left to London, where he took up work at a bookshop in Hampstead. Here, he met and married his first wife and went on to write a third novel titled Keep the Aspidistra Flying in 1936, which recounted his time working in the bookshop. Him and his wife then moved to a small cottage in Wallington, Hertfordshire, where Orwell once again took to writing. He gathered material from a tour of the industrial north and used it in his next novel, The Road to Wigan Pier, which was published in 1937. The second half of his book is essentially a long polemic on socialism. Orwell's political views were still unclear up to this point in his life. For Orwell, the defining political experience of his life happened in the time fighting in the Spanish-American War. In December of 1936, he traveled to Spain and joined a guerrilla group against General Francisco Franco, the general who led the nationalist forces in overthrowing the Second Spanish Republic and went on to become its dictator from 1939 until 1975. He spent 6 months in Spain fighting alongside the non-Stalinist far left, also known as the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification. They were attacked by the Spanish Communist Party's militia in Barcelona in May of 1937. On May 20, 1937, he was wounded in the neck by a bullet that passed a few millimeters away from his carotid artery. These experiences were later recounted by Orwell in both the essay titled Wounded by a Fascist Sniper and his later novel, Homage to Catalonia, published in 1938. Him and his wife were indicted on treason charges and narrowly escaped capture by the Spanish communists when they moved to suppress the poem in June of 1937. It was these experiences that turned Orwell into a lifelong anti-Stalinist and made him, quote, believe in socialism for the first time, while also instilling in him a hatred for totalitarian rule. After the publishing of Homage to Catalonia, Orwell spent the next year recuperating from a life-threatening lung hemorrhage. At the beginning of World War II, he attempted to enlist into the army to fight in the war, but was denied due to his health issues. Orwell instead took up several writing jobs to support himself, becoming an essayist, journalist, and literary critic during this time. He became a propagandist for the BBC from 1941 to 1943, mainly working on programs to gain Indian and East Asian support for Britain's war efforts. Orwell, however, became unsatisfied with this job, writing that he felt like a, quote, an orange that's been trodden on by a very dirty boot. Despite the good pay that he received from this job, he left in 1943 to become the literary editor of The Tribune, a left-wing weekly magazine. He contributed a column titled As I Please, in which he wrote freely about any topic he desired, including nature observations and thoughts on the political situations of the time. In 1944, he finished writing his famous novel titled Animal Farm. It was held back from publishing due to many publishers being critical of the novel's satirical contents regarding the Soviets, as well as their fear of public backlash. However, upon publishing in 1945, the novel saw great critical and popular success and has become a literary classic to this day. This anti-Stalinist novel gave Orwell a comfortable income for the first time in his life. Orwell's personal life began to deteriorate around this time as well. His first wife, Eileen O'Shaughnessy, whom he met in 1935 during his time working in Hampstead after his 5-year stint in Burma and married in 1936, had passed away a few months before the publishing of Animal Farm. She was the daughter of Lawrence O'Shaughnessy, the head of customs in South Shields. She earned a degree in English literature at Oxford and is often recognized as being a creative inspiration to Orwell. In Animal Farm, he credits Eileen for helping to plan the book, and it is also thought that her futuristic poem, End of the Century, 1984, heavily influenced the novel which Orwell would later write, titled 1984. She died due to her heart failure during a surgery in 1945, shortly after she and Orwell had adopted their son, Richard Horatio Blair. Orwell later remarried Sonia Brownwell, the editor at Horizon magazine, on October 13, 1949. Having been diagnosed with tuberculosis after returning from Spain in 1938, Orwell spent his last 5 years living in a remote Scottish island named Jura, an idea given to him by his close friend and founder of The Observer, David Astor. In 1947, at the age of 44, tests confirmed that Orwell had infectious chronic tuberculosis in his lungs. He spent the next few years battling this disease through treatments that were common at the time, such as collapse therapy and other painful surgical procedures to keep the lungs disabled in order to allow them to rest, as well as vitamins, fresh air, and bed confinement. He also tried streptomycin, which seemed a promising treatment for tuberculosis, but had yet to undergo formal trials to test its effectiveness. Using the revenue from Animal Farm, Orwell was able to get this treatment. However, toxic effects were seen in these trials and Orwell was pulled off the treatment, but it still caused him to also develop dermatitis and stomatitis. He continued to try different treatments and even gave streptomycin another try later on, but ultimately gave up hope on a cure. Throughout all this, he was also working on finishing his last novel, 1984, of which he completed a final draft in 1948. Orwell passed away on January 21, 1949, at the age of 46, never seeing the immense success garnered by his final novel at publication in June of 1949. Orwell and his writings continue to be influential today, even making it in second place in the Times list of the 50 greatest British authors since 1945, published in 2008. The BBC also erected a statue of Orwell, pictured to the right, at their headquarters on November 7, 2017. In his short life, he left us with many timeless pieces, some of which we will discuss in more detail coming up.
Hello, I am Nicolette Bond, and I'll be presenting some of the important features, themes, and images of Orwell's collective works. First, we'll talk about some of Orwell's greatest concerns about his contemporary social and political society. These concerns can be seen in his political criticism and themes of social classes, a fascination with ordinary life, and propaganda. Then we'll look at the unfortunate endings that Orwell usually sets up for his kind protagonists. Lastly, we will focus on Orwell's ulterior motive to write. Hooking in the reader with intriguing dystopian tales and fables, Orwell hopes to expose the truth of political systems. This truth is a warning that everyone needs to be decent to one another in order to save their future. The main piece I will be referencing for Orwell's themes and purposes is his own essay, Why I Write, published in 1946. This essay helps give the reader a better idea of his intentions for writing. I also skimmed a few biographical books by John Atkins and Roberta Kalkowski. Online, I noticed that many critics had contrasting opinions about the author's focuses, so these are not all Orwell's important themes, only the ones that I saw mentioned the most. After World War II, Orwell moved from writing literary journalism into political novels. He says in his essay, "What I wanted to do throughout the past 10 years is to make political writing an art." He originally gained interest in analyzing political concepts when he witnessed oppression in Burma as a police officer. He began to put his own political opinions into writing once authoritarian regimes popped up as potential cures of decades of disease, depression, and war. He felt that his political opinion was important to prevent any more exploitation. Orwell's political ideal was democratic socialism. Democratic socialism is the idea of a democratically elected government which distributes property and aid equally and limits private property. This type of government hopes to eliminate social classes and power struggles in order to achieve peace. In his book, The Road to Wigan Pier, he says, socialism means the overthrow of tyranny, at home as well as abroad. On the other hand, Orwell despised tyranny. This type of government bans opposition and is extremely controlling of its people. Because of the Soviet Union's unfair treatment of its opposing citizens, Orwell did not view Russia as a socialist country. Stalin's communism was disguised as socialism, but really it was totalitarian control. Orwell wanted to expose Russia's real political system so other countries would stop copying it and its crimes would be punished. Other totalitarian like governments at the time were Italy and Hitler's Germany. Orwell also criticized these countries. He began to see a pattern in tyrannical governments and often criticized oppressive systems in general, like 1984's vague, tyrannical Big Brother. Sometimes he focused in on the flaws of specific governments, like Russia and Animal Farm. This tranquil idea of domestic socialism had failed multiple times in front of Orwell's eyes during his travels. So he developed a belief that everyone desires power, but some people desire power more than others. The most power hungry become tyrannical leaders. This power struggle makes it difficult for any political system to have perfect equality. Orwell says in 1984, power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. The object of persecution is persecution. The object of torture is torture. The object of power is power. This quote goes to show, at least from how I interpret it, that a revolution can lead to another dictatorship, just like the Russian Revolution, which crowned Stalin, who was originally a revolutionary, and he replaced a dictatorship only to make another dictatorship. Fed by the same power struggle, Orwell also believed that a major global issue was social classes. He believed that every society consists of the oppressed and the oppressors. These groups manipulate each other, grasping for powers at many costs, and become corrupted. In The Road to Wigan Pier, he said, "For 5 years I had been part of an oppressive system, and it had left me with a bad conscience." After his experience with the Burma police, Orwell felt terrible that he had grown up as an intellectual. He despised the intellectuals, or upper classes. He wrote about the flaws of social classes in works like Shooting an Elephant. In the essay, he recounts one of his experiences with the imperial police, where the Burman native population are pressuring him to shoot an elephant that just killed one of them. While the police had intimidating guns, the Burman people had their numbers. Through this experience, Orwell learned that life was a battle of the classes. In his first writings, Orwell had a curiosity for poverty and developed respect for what he called ordinary life. This is ironic because his belief that lower class people were better directly contrasted his desire for people not to be judged by a class system. The man's desire to understand the common classes is probably fueled by rage at his privileged upbringing. As Kat mentioned in her account of Orwell's life, once he left the Burman police, Orwell lived among working classes to experience poverty. In this time, he discovered that despite having less, the lower class people had better familial bonds, followed traditional gender roles better. Traditional gender roles were considered to be important at that time and were often quite happy. He recorded what he saw in his book Down and Out in Paris and London. He wanted to do an honest survey on real lives of the working class. In that book, he writes, "I wanted to submerge myself, to get right among the oppressed, to be one of them and on their side against the tyrants." Again, slashing down those hungry with power, Orwell seemed to side with the oppressed over the oppressors. Orwell ridiculed the intellectuals and their fancy words and praised the ordinary man with his simple writing in his essay, Politics and the English Language. Propaganda was commonly used by numerous governments at the time. Slogans and political advertising was a tactic in many kinds of governments. In the bottom right, you can see a London propaganda poster during World War II for enlisting in the military. On the left of that is an eerily similar poster encouraging Russians to join the war effort. With our modern biases, it's easy for us to see the UK and the US as morally good, and Russia's communist government is evil and overly controlling. But this World War II propaganda shows that both governments were using manipulation methods to encourage their people to act in the ruling party's benefit. These manipulation methods continued way after Orwell's time, later becoming government televised programs that were shown in schools. The US only a few decades ago was still using propaganda to teach kids not to do drugs or drink alcohol and be wary of potential kidnappers. Orwell was aware that this seemingly innocent practice of his contemporary governments was really a strategic misuse of power. In the preface of the Ukrainian edition of Animal Farm, Orwell understands that totalitarian propaganda can control the opinion of enlightened people in democratic countries. Governments can fake aspirations for freedom to win over the people, then gain the power to control. This occurred during the Russian Revolution. Orwell also uses propaganda so that the regimes living in his stories reflect those of his reality. In 1984, the propaganda was on government television shows that people were required to watch. He imitated slogans that were used by governments to increase patriotism. The 1984 one, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, is clearly ironic, but the people are brainwashed into accepting what they hear. Since most of his later novels warn of totalitarian dangers, Orwell puts many of his characters through hell to reflect the unfairness of such a society. In order to put across the message that colonization is practically unfair foreign oppression, Orwell writes Burmese Days. The main character, Flory, is one of the colonists who have come to Burma. His birthmark is a symbol for his alienation in both England and Burma. Since he has left his home country, he feels less English. His encroachment on Burmese lands makes him a foreigner to the natives. As Orwell says, he has grasped the special nature of the hell that is reserved for the Anglo-Indians. His suicide at the end of the story is unfortunate and a symbolic representation of imperialism being destructive and self-destructive. Orwell also ruins the spirits of his protagonists in 1984. Winston and Julia believed that their love was strong enough to resist any attempts by the government to dissolve it, but the government did murder their affection. By the end, they live the rest of their lives destroyed, and Winston gives in to the brainwashing of Big Brother. Now that we have looked at some of the themes Orwell includes in his writing, we can interpret why he writes. I have come to believe that Orwell strives to reveal truths and strike down illusions. He backs up this theory in his essay, saying, I write it because there is some lie I want to expose, some fact to which I want to draw attention. And Orwell is fully equipped to argue the truth. He has done literary journalism to cement his political beliefs and switched to novels once he had truths to tell. He also criticizes illusions, or strategies used by governments to dumb down and control their citizens. In 1984, Julia works in a government department that subtly distorts the public's access to information. The government turns public suspicion away by printing and distributing porn to the masses. The people are so enticed by this illusion that they stay unaware of the knowledge they have lost. His praise for socialism reflects that Orwell has a greater goal for society. Completely agreeing with the works of Charles Dickens, Orwell believes that if everyone was decent to one another, the world would also be decent. The main critique that Orwell had of Russian Revolution was that Lenin did not create protective rights. Lenin did not see the need for decency, so the country shifted into tyranny. Decency for Orwell is equivalent to love. He believed that everyone needed to love one another, no matter the race or class, and then there would be no need for competition or power. Another one of Orwell's goals was to warn his readers about the dangers of governments that misuse or overly use their power. His dystopian settings had terrifying pictures of dominating governments and dead-minded people living with their brains mainly occupied with porn magazines. His readers were meant to make the connection that under totalitarian governments, the people are like puppets. With this knowledge, they would be more likely to support Orwell's socialist politics. He put his lessons into seemingly lightweight genres that would attract large groups of readers. In a way, Orwell used his propaganda for the greater good. Next, you will be able to see one of these lightweight genres tell the story of a communist farm.
A detailed text analysis of Animal Farm. It talks about a story about animals. A man named Jones raised many animals in the farm. They were engaged in heavy labor every day, and their living conditions were very poor. The animals listened to the last word of the old major about the rebellion, drove away their owner Jones, and won a decisive victory in the Battle of the Cowshed. So they managed the farm themselves and renamed it Animal Farm. This is an animal version of the reality of human society. The laboring masses revolted and established political power. The pig wrote on the wall with the 7 principles of animism we all agree with. Those with 2 legs are assholes, and those with 4 legs are friends. No animal shall wear clothes, sleep in bed, drink alcohol, or kill other animals. All animals are equal. The animals who have become masters faces many difficulties and work hard with hope. In the rebellion, pigs showed their talents. Snowball and Napoleon became animal leaders. Snowball is a theorist and doer. It proposed to build windmills, mechanism the farmers, and improve pigs' lives. However, before reaching his ambition, he was exiled by Napoleon, an ambitious conspirator, and the animals empathically to the snowball were also purged. A group of dogs kept by Napoleon frightened the animals like cold cicadas with high pressure means. They dare to be angry, but dare not to speak. Napoleon gave himself many medals, like the Beast of England was raising a flag, was replaced by a song praising Napoleon. The pigs of the ruling class did not work, moved into John's farmer house, sleep in bed, dressed and enjoy milk and eggs. The meeting on Sunday was also cancelled. The Napoleon was in charge of everything. As long as Napoleon said so, it was right. The animals silently went to the wall to look for the 7 princes of the animalism, but found that many modifiers were added to the princes, like no animal shall kill other animals for no reason, shall not sleep in a bed with sheets, shall not drink too much. The windmill collapsed twice due to the destruction of the typhoon and joints. The animals worked hard, but their living conditions and food were getting worse and worse. The most industrious house boxer fell ill due to the overwork and was sent to the slaughterhouse in the city. A few years later, the windmill was built and output increased continuously, but the lives of the animals except the pigs and dogs remain the same. However, the animals still believe that they are the only animals in England who are in charge, regardless of who is called master, and they are proud of it. Napoleon became president of the Farmer Republic, and pigs began to learn to walk upright on their hind legs like humans. The slogan of the rebellion was also changed to 4 feet are good, 2 feet are better. The pigs also made a deal with surrounding human beings, held a banquet and drank a lot, and set up his hind legs, it's really hard to tell whether it's a person or a pig. There is only one of the 7 principles left. Like it said, all animals are equal and some animals are more equal than others. The word equality has no comparative level, but more equality is inequality, which is obviously Orwell's sharp irony. Why animals? Because Orwell said he once saw a little boar whipping a house. He later wrote, "It struck me that if only such animals become aware of their strengths, we should have no power over them, and that means exploit animals in much the same way as the rich exploit the worker." The revolution in the animal farm, it is a political satire. Animal farm is a tale of opposite individuals who long for freedom, but ultimately are corrupted by assuming the very power that had originally obsessed them. It stresses the deplorable conditions of mistreated animals who exhibit many human characteristics. The animals revolt and expel Mr. Jones and his wife from the farmer, generally valued by the overall critic of the communist system in the former Soviet Union. It is a fairy tale. No. After Animal Farmer was published in 1945, George Orwell discovered with horror that bookshelves were placed his lower on children's shelves. According to his housekeeper, he began traveling from the bookstore to bookstore, requesting that the book was shelved with adult works. The dual identity as children's story and adult satire has stayed with Orwell novel for more than 50 years. If you want to understand more about Animal Farm, here you need to learn about the Russian Revolution. In 1990s, Russian people upset with the Russians Cecil Nicholas II. In 1861, Russians peasants freed from the feudal serfdom, struggling to survive under an oppressive government. In 1917, revolution happened. Cecil's government was overthrown and replaced by the Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin. Lenin died in 1924. His former colleagues, Leon Trotsky, hero of the early revolution, and Joseph Stalin, head of the Communist Party. So this is the main characters in the Animal Farm, and these characters are representative. Napoleon represents Joseph Stalin. Napoleon is a boy who leads the rebellion against Farmer Jones. After the rebellion's success, he systematically began to control all aspects of the farmer until he is an undisputed triumph. While Joseph Stalin is a communist dictator of the Soviet Union from 1922 to 1953, who killed all people who opposed him. And he loved power and used the KGB, a secret police, to enforce his ruthless, corrupt antics. Farmer Jones represents Tsar Nicholas II. Farmer Jones is the irresponsible owner of the farmer, let his animals starve and beats them with a hoop. And sometimes he shows random kindness. Caesar Nicholas II, he is a weak Russian leader during the early 90s. He is often cruel and brutal to his people. He displays his isolated kindness. Slow Boy represents Leon Trotsky. He's a boy who became one of the rebel's most valuable leaders. After drawing complicated plans for the construction of the windmill, he is chased off of the farmer forever by Napoleon's dog and thereafter used as a scapegoat for the animals' troubles. Leon Trotsky, a pure communist leader who was influenced by the teacher of the Karl Marx. He wanted to improve life for people in Russia, but was driven by Lenin's KGB. There are some other characters in this story. Old bro who speaks about the evils represented by human roses the animals into rebellion represented by Karl Marx, who is the inventor of the communism. Scribbler, a big mouse pig who became Napoleon's mouthpiece. Throughout the novel, he displays his ability to manipulate the animal's thoughts through the use of the hollow yet convincing rhetoric. Represents the propaganda department that worked to support Stalin's image. Boxer detected but dim-witted horse, who as in the building of the windmill, but is sold to a blue borer after collapsing from the exhaustion. He represents the dedicated but tricked communist supporters of Stalin. In the story, animism equals communism. Animism, like taught by all the major, they have the principles of better life for workers. All animals are equal. Everyone owns farmer in the communism, which is invented by Karl Marx. All people are equal. Government owns everything. Everyone owns the government. And in today's significance, now that Soviet Union communism has fallen and the Cold War is over, does animal farmer deserve our attention? The answer lies into the power of the algorithm. Because they require us to make comparisons and connections and can be meaningful to any readers in any historic period. The story of Animal Farm will always have lessons to teach us about the ways that people abuse power and manipulate others. So that's all. Thank you.